Alrighty, if everything works out well, I should be live and you should be seeing Get Started with Powerapps and Automate. We are kicking off this track called the More Power track. So thank you for coming here. This will be the first one in the session. So as we move forward, I am Craig Jahnke. I am a customer engineer at Microsoft, and I specialize in Teams and Power Apps. I've been doing, well, stuff for over 10 years with Microsoft. I've been started out doing front-end, back-end development for a payroll company years ago, and we were using SharePoint till 2007 to manage our projects on the side, and I got told that I would become the SharePoint administrator because we needed somebody to do it. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people that I talk to who get started in the Office 365 space got started through SharePoint, and it was kind of the volunteer portion, like told that they were going to do that. I don't know anybody that really started out going, hey, I wanted to be a SharePoint developer. From there, I got recruited by a company that asked me if I wanted to join their SharePoint developer team. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I took that role, and I realized that I was not just joining a SharePoint development team, I was the team. The admin had left them short. So I was the only person on the team. They gave me a platform and basically said, here's your tenant, go with it, right? Here's your SQL servers, here's your SharePoint server, your farm, go to that. So I was there for a while, adminning and developing. So that was really cool. I got to learn everything about SharePoint. And then I moved on to consulting, did a lot of migrations. Office 365 rolled out several years ago. I was first on that. Teams I've done a lot with, and Power Apps and Flow now that I've done that. I am also one of the main organizers for the Office 365 M365 Chicago. Originally started out as SharePoint Saturday Chicago. 2013 was when we did the first one. So we've been doing them at the DeVry in Addison, Illinois, doing live events, having a couple hundred people get together. With the state of the world now, we're virtual, so this is actually pretty cool because we got attendees from all over the world, and I got a really great organizing crew with Jay Lease, Mike Blumenthal, Ralph Rivas, and Heather Ackman. Really helped pull this together. I also run the Chicago Power Platform user group. If you are interested in that, there is the link for that, meetup.com/CMPPUG. We meet the third Wednesday of every month about 5:30 p.m. Central. It's all virtual. We did have a on-site meeting, but that got canceled. So we hope to continue that and still be able to do a virtual team meeting with that. So recommend, if you are not involved in the community and if you do not do user groups, it's a great way to meet a lot of friends. I've got some great friends that I've met through the community through these type of events. It's also good to have people that you can reach out to for when you have things come up, right? And you don't know who to ask. So makes your life a lot better. So if you're in, so please join us. And if you're not, if you don't want to join me and my group, find a group by you. So let's see. Massive thanks goes out to our sponsors for making it possible. So our conference sponsor was Veeam, and our track sponsors are AvePoint Concurrency, KWiz, Magenic, PointFire, RSM, and TeamHub by Cyclotron. And this track is sponsored by RSM. So we will play their video.
So Power Apps, and specifically the Power App in a Day concept, is great for clients because one of the things that Microsoft is very focused on is what's called the citizen developer. The citizen developer is a term that's used to help clients understand that you don't need a full-time programmer to help you with your products now. You can utilize your own internal folks to build components of your system that don't exist. Now, the Power App in a Day course that we've been teaching allows people to come into an environment, learn how to build these applications in one day, and then take that information back to their organizations so that they can then start to think, hey, how can we make this better? How can we streamline our processes to make sure that we're taking advantage of all of the capabilities of our Microsoft stack?
So thank you for watching that. RSM is one of our sponsors that help make these type of events possible. They give us money to be able to host this, to be able to do raffle prizes, to be able to speaker prizes, things like that. So also, any funds that we do raise for this conference, we are actually going to donate to the Chicago Public Schools through Children First Fund. So if you are interested in contributing, there is a link for a direct donate at bit.ly/M365CFF, or we are doing a 50-50 raffle where $20 per entry will get you half of the pot if you win it, and that's at paypal.me/M365Chicago. So a great organization trying to help out kids in need, especially in this time where everybody needs a little bit of help and a lot of technology. With that said, let's get started. We're kicking off the More Power track. So I am first. We have Mohammed Derhali is going to be talking about Power Portals and Power Apps. Nicola Lick is going to do the Magnificent 7 Simple Tricks to Boost Your Power BI Development. Nick Van Voorhoven is a Forms Flow and Power BI Streaming Dataset Walk into a Bar. So pretty cool session there. Mark Rackley, if you've not ever seen him, is very entertaining and very knowledgeable, and one of the best known people in this space. He's doing advanced Power Automate flows for everyday use. Mike Fitzmaurice is doing stage-based workflows, principles and practice, and then Nikki Van Voorhoven is ending everything up with the query folding into Power BI. So hopefully you stick around for all of those if you're really interested in the Power Platform, and I hope you are, because you're here for this session. So we're going to kick off this session with just talking about Microsoft's mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. So we know, Microsoft knows, that transforming your business is challenging, right? There's a lot of things that come into play when we're talking about getting solutions that help you meet your business goals, from, budget constraints to resources constraints, getting the right insights, managing your systems, integrating with legacy systems, having a ton of complex processes and business paper processes, but we still want to make sure that we're using right tools, we're doing security and compliance, and we've got our shadow IT governance going so that people can actually build and use solutions in our own environment that we know what they're doing. They don't have to go outside and buy a third-party app. They don't have to go out and build something from scratch. So it's kind of where we're looking to do, is give your users the ability to do their own, what we call democratizing of digital transformation, right? And I think it got mentioned in the video, I know it did, that they talk about citizen developers. So what we really want to look into is empowering innovation to let people be able to build the things that they need. Really good solutions, enterprise solutions that are easy to do, relatively simple or low code, and then we want to be able to make intelligent decisions based on that data that comes back, and we want to streamline our business processes, right? Everybody needs to do things easier, better, faster, and less repetitive, and less paper processing and those kind of things. So that's where Microsoft has kind of gotten into the Microsoft Power Platform, and hopefully you've heard of it. If you're not, you're learning about it here. This is a great session to start off your Power Platform with, because we're going to talk about Power Apps and Power Automate in detail. But the thing to know is that there are actually a lot of parts to the Power Platform, as you can see here. We got Power BI, which is a business analytics dashboard, and Power Virtual Agents, which is those little chatbots that people like to build to be able to answer questions and, do things in teams, like ask you simple questions, have it provide you with answers. And those are pretty cool. You can build those, and you just basically put in questions and then answers to that. And if they don't know, if the chatbot can't figure it out, then we do another one. Then we'll ask it a different question. Good stuff. in the Power Platform, but the two that we're focused on here for this session are going to be Powerapps and Power Automate. Craig, what are those? Those are the apps that we use to build apps and streamline business processes. So if you have been around for a while, there was a SharePoint on-premises 2010, really, and customers needed to use SharePoint on premises to do things like fill out forms and process information. The way that they did that for the forms and make fancy forms where we could hide things, move things around was called InfoPath. The way that we did workflows were to do them in a tool called SharePoint Designer and make these nice little approval workflows and little workflows that, you know, kind of do some stuff, but they were nice, but they didn't scale well and they didn't move to Office 365 very well. I mean, they would work, but they were hard to maintain. They're hard to build new stuff, and they were limited to the SharePoint Online. So Microsoft came up with the Power Platform and these two tools especially. So Power Apps says application development. I like to think of it as the front end for a lot of things. So it's like your form builder or your application that you're kind of used to with like phone apps. So really nice, simple applications that we can build with relatively low or no code. And why do we want to do low or no code? Well, the old model of development and custom applications for an enterprise was, hey, I'm a user, I need something. I submit it to my IT team, right? And they have a limited number of people who can actually build stuff. If you're in a good company, we're talking 10 to 15 developers, right? And that's a fairly large size company. You might be lucky that you're in a very big enterprise company and you have like 100, but most companies that I work with or that I see usually have about 10 to 15, and I've worked with a lot of companies that have 1 or 2 developers, right? So it is hard for them to field all those requests from the users and turn those into viable solutions. So where the Power Platform kind of comes in is Power Apps and Power Automate lets you make those solutions relatively with very little code, so that the average power user can figure out how to do them. And now usually there's a lot more power users in an environment or in an organization than there are professional developers, right? So it's usually can be anywhere from like a 5-to-1 to 7-to-1 ratio. So if I've got 10 IT developers, right, I have the potential to have 50 to 100 power users, citizen developers that we call them, that are spattered throughout the organization, but just really like to tinker around stuff and build things in their spare time. So what I can do is make those people developers and give them Power Apps and Power Automate to work with and streamline their own process and kind of let my users go to them. They may be our users, but now I've increased my ability to put out custom applications tenfold, right? And then if my citizen developers or my power users have problems, they're still the developers, the professional developers, the guys that love to break open Visual Studio, right, and use that. They can still do that. That's just taking it to the next level. So we still have those people available, but they can really focus on the hard solutions and the custom solutions that the organization needs while delegating out some of the other stuff. And then we see down here some of the things that can fall into here. So we have data connectors, SharePoint Designer workflows, and InfoPath really worked with SharePoint on premises. Not a whole lot of things you can do with that. I mean, it's nice. You can do a lot of things there, but very limited in what your scope is. With the Power Platform, we have data connectors, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, but basically we have hundreds of data connectors that are built in, so we can connect into any of the Microsoft 365 tools. Like, not only are we talking SharePoint, we're talking OneDrive for Business, we're talking Exchange, we're talking Planner, To Do, all of those kind of things. And then there's a lot of third-party apps. So we start looking at Twitter, Salesforce, Jira, those kind of things. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then these two kind of go in here. Common Data Services is the database that Dynamics 365 is built on. So we have the ability to tap in that to that data service and use a database if we really want to. And we don't want to do something like a SharePoint list or an Excel file, something that we need a little bit more power to, but we don't want to just log into a SQL server or something to that effect. And AI Builder is a piece of Powerapps that actually allows us to scan items. So we can use AI and machine learning to scan documents and read them, and we get to be able to see what those fields are. So we can do business cards and pull names, emails, phone numbers off of that. We can do purchase orders, so we can train it to read date of the purchase order, the dollar amount, the items that were purchased, and try to get rid of some of that manual entry that we'll have to do. So we can scan those, and then we can take those and from there, put it in a Power App, put it in a SharePoint list, and run some kind of workflow on that and make some evaluations. So we can do some pretty cool stuff with that. So let's talk a little bit about Power Apps in general. We call it a low-code solution or approach to building applications. It is basically what I like to see. If you look at it, we got a picture over here of an app that I will show you more detail and kind of how it works when we get to the demo part. But I like to call it PowerPoint front end. So if you can drag and drop stuff in PowerPoint and make it look good, you can make a pretty good, decent looking app in Power Apps. And then the back end is kind of like Excel on steroids. So any of the coding that you might need to do, but when we call it low code, tends to look like Excel formulas. And I don't know if you can see that right here. I'll try to blow it up, but you can see like we're doing a filter here, and that's very Excel-like. And I'll explain a little bit more, but we're just basically looking at a data set here, and we're creating a little variable to put that in and filtering here. So on the items, it's a little bit more complex than that, but it's not that hard to figure out. And like I said, if you can do Excel formulas, or if you're really good at PowerPoint, it's a natural transition. And then again, we have content to our existing data. We have 250 connectors. We integrate with Power BI. It shows up well on mobile, which is also key. And then we have governance on the back end, and it is extendable through pro development. So the nice thing is Power Apps, like I said, is for everyday developer. We can use it. We can crank some stuff out. So our citizen developers, our power users can do some pretty cool things with it. But, there's no limit to what we can do with it, because we can do things like Azure services, API management, where we're looking on data. We can have on premises data gateways, so we're connecting to our SQL servers, we're connecting to data warehouses, we can hook into the machine and cognitive services in Azure. We can do a lot of things, and we can bust it open in Visual Studio and Visual Code. So, not just for, hey, I'm a little power user, I want to create an app, which is cool, saves a lot of time for people, right? Saves a lot of time in the system. You can crank out some stuff really fast. But if I need a more powerful solution, I have tools I can use to back end it, and I have tools I can also use to build it. Then we can throw it into a whole Azure DevOps thing and push it out to production and manage the life cycle on that. So then what I said is, when we're doing Canvas-based apps, and that's what this is, you get a nice, what you see is what you get editor. So basically kind of like PowerPoint, right? I just drag and drop stuff on. I will be able to color code it. I'll be able to enlarge it. So that really easy look and feel, and able to create stuff pretty simply, and then hook it to our data so that we can do things with it. Let's see. And then just a quick overview of the two types of Power Apps. We have what we call the Canvas app and the model-driven app. So the Canvas app allows us to do the kind of cool looking, we're used to our cell phone, pulling a little bit of data, display it, do forms. The model-driven app leverages the data in the common data services for the most part. So it's very tabular. We want to enter a lot of data. We want to do it quickly. We might want to hook a little workflow on that, like a process-driven workflow. But if you're used to working in Dynamics 365, you're going to want apps like this. But for the most part, the users who are using SharePoint are going to want these types of apps, so the canvas-driven apps. And you can see some more screenshots where we can embed reports and things like that. So that's pretty cool. And the nice thing about Powerapps and Power Automate, where we get to it, is they can be published to the web pretty easily. So we have applications in the Android store, in the iOS store, so Google Play, the Powerapps app, and we also have the Power Automate apps, which is great because you can go out there, they've been approved, you can download those apps and run them from your mobile application. And then any Powerapps or flows that you create will be pushed to those apps. So you'll access them through those apps. We don't have to push out a new app every time we have a new Power app or new flow, right? You can just access them from the apps you already have. So no need to re-authenticate or anything like that. You just have the one app that you got, and they're built to scale to the device that you have. So a lot of cool features and things with that. That brings us to Power Automate. So Power Automate allows us to integrate the business processes that we have with either just by themselves or to be able to hook them into a Power app and do some back-end processing. So a lot of times we'll see Power Apps take in information and do something with it. It might kick off a Power Automate. It might write it to something like a SharePoint list. And then once it gets into a SharePoint list, we will then kick off the addition to the SharePoint list kicks off the Power Automate. In addition, we might just have a SharePoint list where if somebody's dropping files in, somebody's making changes, or if we're receiving emails with a certain attachment or a certain subject line, we can create a Power Automate to actually do something from there. So we can do some pretty cool things in Power Automate workflow solutions in a really nice graphical, easy to use graphical interface that, as you can see over here, kind of can be laid out as to what the steps are pretty easily. And we can do things like get approvals, which is a common use of Power Automate. And if you get good at the approval workflow, there's not a whole lot that you can't do. It's really the backbone of creating new applications, in my opinion, because it's going to have a lot of steps into it. It'll have a lot of steps, which I will cover shortly, but so that kind of thing, moving files, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do here. So we can use Power Automate to get notifications, to copy files. So notifications, if emails come in or we want to be alerted to when things happen, lists get updated, we just want to know what those are, and it can send a notification, either push notification or an email or something to that effect. Copy files, we might have a SharePoint list where I'm using it to drop different types of forms in there, and based on the forms, I might want a workflow to run periodically that redistributes those forms into different libraries. So I might just drop everything for a project into one file, and then have a workflow that says, okay, this is a purchase order, let's put it in this document library. This is a statement of work, let's put it into this folder. Let's here's a receipts, right? Let's put it into this folder and kind of separate our data. Then also we can collect data, so we can get data in a form, we can get data in a Power App, we can get data just off of SharePoint list and do something with that. And last one on this list is automate approvals. So quite often, in business, we need approvals for everything, right? Our managers want us to sign off on anything. I need a new laptop. I need a vacation. I need something to that effect, right? So I fill out my form. It goes to a manager. He approves it. If it's within the right dollar amount, I get approved. If it's not, it may have to go up the chain to somebody else for approval, so we can do multi-stage approvals. But some really cool things in order to be able to process data and streamline that and get rid of all the email chains and the paper that we're filling out, and just kind of put everything online. So let's see. So how does that work? Well, first of all, when we create a Power Automate, we create what's called a workflow or a flow. So a couple years ago, Microsoft came out with Powerapps, and they came out with Flow. Flow was the workflow product, but about 6 months ago decided that we didn't like the name Flow and we liked the name Power Platform. So with Power Platform, we had Power BI and we had Power Apps, and then Flow didn't necessarily fit. So they renamed it to Power Automate. So you may hear Flow or see it in the documentation, but Flow and Power Automate are used interchangeably. And to really confuse things, we call the things that you build in Power Automatic flows and Power Automate flows. So they will be workflows, they'll be called flows. So you'll hear flows used a lot. So how do we start a flow? The flow always starts with a trigger. Every flow has one trigger. A trigger is something that kicks off the workflow and makes it run. So you can see we can do like a list, not a list. We can do we can schedule something so that it happens at a certain time. We can do things that's called an automated flow, where if somebody updates a list, it gets a record is created, like over here, a record was created Dynamics 365. That triggers something to happen. We can also have buttons. So the button is just an automated process. It comes, we can just have a button on a phone app to do something. We can have it in Power Apps. We can have it in Forms. They do something, bang, it kicks off the workflow. And then we have actions. Actions are one to many. We can have, every workflow can only have one trigger, but we can have many actions. So we can have it kick off an email. We can have it update the SharePoint. We can do an approval. We can send more emails. We can deny approvals. We can have it reach out to Twitter and send a tweet. We can do a lot of different things with that. So you can just keep building that, that little workflow to do whatever you need it to do. So this is just a screen showing you some of the workflow, the triggers. You'll go in and you'll see you can do a button, you can do a date and time, you can get a HTTPS request, we can get it from Power Apps, we can get it from the schedule. And a lot of times they come from SharePoint or Outlook and OneDrive. So those are various things that you can do. Actions, if you go into build, you can do a lot of actions. You can write to a SQL database. You can do a condition, apply to each. We can do things like do a switch statement. So we're looking at multiple things, or we can just terminate a workflow is some of them. One of the big ones that we use is called a condition. So conditions are simple if-then situations, and this example actually has a few of them, and is a really pretty cool design flow to show you something that you can do that you will probably do a lot if you start using Power Automate. So the first thing up here is when a new item is created. So we have a SharePoint list we're looking at. When a new item is created in that SharePoint list, it's going to ask it if the request is more than 7 days out for this scenario. And if I click on this little bar, it will expand and show me what we're actually looking at. So it'll tell me what SharePoint site we're looking at and what list in that specific SharePoint site or document library. The request comes in and it says if it's 7 days out or not. If it is not more than 7 days out, it's going to get an automatic rejection email. And then pretty much that's it. If it is more than 7 days out, it's going to send an approval email. And then based on whether or not the manager approves it, it will either send an approval email or a rejection email. And we can add more actions here, but really kind of a cool, you know, got two conditions in here. And we're basically looking for yes or no answers and then be able to expand down here. And we could add another action like break to a SharePoint list and put it in there. Send another email, go into another system and update that. If there's an Excel spreadsheet, we may want to write a row into an Excel spreadsheet. So we have some flexibility with what we want to do. And this is another thing that we have. It's called the switch case. So not everything falls into that if then this, right? Yes or no, right? We might have several things. So this one is an example of we get an email. We're reading the subject line on an email, and if the subject equals customer, we're going to create a contact. If the subject equals users, we're going to send an approval email. And if no, we're going to do something with an HTTP request. So we're going to do something and write it somewhere, might send an email or something. The thing about this is now I've got 3 scenarios and I have this little plus sign. So if I find out that I am using, like I'm getting a lot that it says owner, and I need to come in here and make a 3rd case, I can just come into my workflow and click that button and I will get a case 3. And then I can rename these, which I would normally do so that I could tell what they're doing. So good best practice would be to rename my cases so that I knew that this was case customer, then this was case user. And if I didn't have these expanded, I could look through these pretty easily and be able to know what they do. So, but this one will let me add more cases, and I can do something different from that. So you're going to have at least 3 or more things that you might want to do if you use a switch case. And then we have the apply to each. So the nice little looping section, we might read a list, we might get a bunch of emails, and then for every one we want to do something. So we want to read them. We want, in this example, we'll want to read their subject and see if they contain what that contains. If it contains meet now, we're going to do a bunch of stuff depending on the importance of the email. But this could easily be get all the items from a SharePoint list and do something. Get all the items from an Excel spreadsheet and do something. Get all the items from a SQL database and do something. So to each one of those. So we have the ability to loop through items and do things. We also have the opportunity to do what we call a do until. So keep repeating steps until certain conditions are met. And this one's often used with an approval workflow, because when we do an approval workflow, we're sending an email to somebody, usually a manager or somebody in HR or maybe somebody in billing, to say, can you approve this? If they approve it, that's great. We get an email, we update a SharePoint list, we update the Excel spreadsheet, whatever we want to do. If we say no, that's also good, right? Because we did get an answer. But sometimes that sits in the pending, and we want to send a gentle reminder to send, for them to look at that. So we'll do something like a do until the status changes from pending. We might have this on a schedule so that every couple days, like every 3 days or so, it sends the email or gets the object and sends an email and lets them know that they haven't done that approval. That's the one thing that was nice about SharePoint Designer workflows, is they could do that automatically. For Power Automate, we got to kind of build that ourselves. Another feature of Power Automate is what we call scopes. Scopes are pretty cool. They allow us to group information together. So in Power and SharePoint Designer workflows, they were called stages. So we could put all this information into like one bucket. And then if we got to move the scope up or down in the workflow, we can do that. Like here, I've got this creating a contact and then creating item. If for some reason I would need to create the item first, I could just drag this down and they will change. So I'll show that when we kind of do a demo in a minute on what you can do with Power Automate. And one of the last things we're going to talk about that is important to know are parallel branches. So the cool thing about Power Automate, again, you have this visual workflow that lets you see what's going on. Sometimes we need to do 2 things at one time. So we have the ability to get an item from SharePoint, and then here you can see where it's expanded, and I can see my SharePoint site address, and I can see my list name, and then I can do something like send an email. But at the same time, I might want to do HTTP requests, and that's usually making like an API call into a website to get more information. And when I get that, then I can come back here and combine it with the information I got in the email and create an item in a different SharePoint list. So I can run, like I said, run things in parallel and see how those happen. Or, I don't have to have multiple workflows to do it. I can do it all at once. So that's really cool. Now, I know what you're thinking, Craig. This looks kind of okay, not too hard, but I have to think pretty logical about it, and I don't have any experience with this, so how do I do it? Normally, you might go in and create a blank workflow and just grab these pieces and step through it and do it piece by piece. What's nice about what the tool is Power Automate is there's a list of libraries in there of quite common things we've found people to be wanting to do. And I'll show some of these here. Like we may want to get an attachment and save it off. We might get an email with an attachment and we might copy that to OneDrive for Business. Why do I want to do that? Well, my manager sends me stuff every once in a while. I could do it for every email I got. I could just strip off all the attachments and put it in OneDrive, and then that way I know where all my attachments are and I don't have to look for them through my emails. I could narrow this down a bit though and say any attachments I get from my manager, let's strip those off, or let's copy those and put them into a folder called Manager. Email he sent me, I can just go to OneDrive, click open that folder, and I can find all those. Another reason why it might be a client. So if I got clients that are sending me emails, I want to put all those in one location. I could write those to a SharePoint document library too. So that's kind of cool. Other things are the approval workflows. We'll show you one of those. Just get kind of notifications as things happen. And these will automatically kind of set up and scaffold out the workflow for you. And then you will be able to create them, and you can look at them for examples when you're trying to figure out how to do something too. And then the last thing I want to cover before we start looking at what the tool actually looks like, right, is connectors. So connectors are ways to hook into other information. Like I said, SharePoint Designer workflows a few years ago would, just do SharePoint, but now we have the ability to do so much more. We got Office 365, we've got OneDrive for Business, we've got Office 365 user information. So if I want to pull users, information about a user, who their manager or something, and I can get that. I can get information out of SharePoint. So these are the big ones that you're going to want to use. You may want to use Planner, you may want to use Powerapps, although some of them require premium license depending on what you're doing with them. So pay attention when you get in there and you'll see a premium license. The other big thing to know, which I've learned the hard way a couple times, is the OneDrive for Business and the OneDrive Personal icon look very, very similar. So when you're trying to build something and trying to either put a file into OneDrive for Business or get a file from OneDrive for Business, and you use the OneDrive for Personal connector, so it becomes hard to make that actually work, and you're going, why can't I get my documents? So then you check your connectors and you see that you use the wrong one. So that is just a big pain, and I don't know why they don't change it. It's the OneDrive for Business just has a slightly bigger cloud. So important stuff to know there. And then how connectors work. Connectors can be worked all over your workflow, right? They can be an in point to a trigger, or they can be an out point with an action. So a connector, again, like Office 365 Outlook, we get an email. So that when the email arrives, that's a trigger. So that's one of our connectors. And then once we figure out what we want to do with it, we want to create an item in SharePoint. So we're going to use that connector for the item going out. So we have to supply credentials and stuff for that. The nice thing about it is it works on the same credentials as M365. So you don't necessarily have access to things that you wouldn't normally have access to. So it does a good job of enforcing permissions. If you need it to have access to something more, then you're going to have to look at the account that you're using. You might not want to use a personal account. You might want to use more of a system account and set up the permissions for that system account to do what you want to do. So if I'm building workflows for myself and to streamline my processes and do things to make my life easier, I'm going to use my connector because it's going to be probably just stuff I want to use. If I'm using a workflow with a SharePoint list or a team site or something to that effect, I might want to use the team security group, give that permissions, or I might want to create like a service account, like admin at, admin flow admin, Powerapps, something to that effect, and assign that just so I can have multiple people access that, multiple people use that, and kind of not have to worry about what it has access to, or if I move it around that it will break my connections. And then if you don't have a connector that in there that you need to have. So a lot of times people have their own homegrown systems that they want to use. We can always create custom connectors, right? So we can basically just build an API into whatever service that we're trying to call from. Hopefully they will already have that. And then we can put a wrapper around it, hook it into, build a connector around it. There's a lot of tutorials on that. Microsoft's got pretty good documentation, but there's basically a wizard that you walk through and you put in what the API is, what the secret key is, what the key for the API is, and then you can test that out. So again, you might want to have something like on-premises server that you're trying to hook into an environment, or a custom Azure app that you might need to log into. So you just would do it that way. So you have flexibility if there's something that you want to get connected with that's not necessarily in the 200 to 300 ones that we already have pre-built. So from here, we're going to take a short little demo through Powerapps and Power Automate. So this is a demo tenant that I have. And if you come into Office 365, so portal.office 365, hopefully you will all have this same similar screen, and you will have things down here where you can create it. And this is what the Power Automate looks like, and this is what the Powerapps looks like. If I really wanted to see them, I could also come to my little, I call it the waffle. I'm not really sure. I know it's got a different name for it, but the menu, the app menu. So if we click on this, it'll show me there. So we're going to start out with Power Automate first, because that's the one that I can get to. There we go. Let's try that again. Powerapps. So if I go to this thing, this little diamond, it's going to launch my Powerapps Studio. The nice thing about my Powerapps Studio is I have a home. So this will show me where I can start. I can connect a Canvas act, I can do a blank model app, I can do a portal, right? And it's got some training in here, and then it'll show me my apps. The second one down is learning, which is really cool because we put the learning right in the tool. And if you click on these, you'll get an interactive tour of our guided learning, help topics, and a connection to the community. So if you're going to be doing this, join the community. There are a lot of people who've built a lot of cool stuff, and they're all really, really helpful in helping people do what they need to do. So I am just going to quickly go to an app. So this is an app that I built. You may have saw it on the screens, but we have some workshops and stuff on do that. And basically, I am, as a data source, looking at a bunch of different places, but 2 Excel spreadsheets for these 2 things. Devices is telling me who the computers are, and this is telling me who the manufacturer is, and I can do comparisons on these relatively pretty easy. And then I can hook into users to get information on who the user is up here, and I can do some other things with it. And if I click on this stack thing, it's going to show me what I have. So I have a main screen, and I have a button, and I have a device, and I have all these combo boxes and check boxes. And if I click on them, it kind of highlights them. And then I can have multiple different screens to go to, right? And you can see with all of these, I can insert them here. So I got new screens, labels, buttons, input gallery. So a little bit different than PowerPoint, but you actually see them, right? And then we can click on these and do things with that. Like I've got my font, I've got my font size, all that kind of stuff. And if I run this, it makes a nice little app. I can connect it. I can do things like have these buttons appear. I can go to a different one and have different pictures appear. And then when I compare the items, it will let me do something here. It takes me to a new screen where I can compare them. If I order them, if I order the one I want, I can click on this. It will write to a SharePoint list, and I can also do this and write to accommodated services. So it's kind of a mixed thing in the background. But what this does is write to a SharePoint list, which is pretty cool. And I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to speed through this. Let's see. So this writes to a SharePoint list here where I get my order data. So so with just a little bit of connection, it writes to this SharePoint list, which is then going to kick off a workflow, which I have over here. So if I go to Power Automate, We have my workflows where I can create templates, all that kind of good stuff. And if I look into my flows, I will see one called purchase approval. And if I click on that, it's going to tell me the details on it. I can see the history of my runs for 28 days. If I click on this, it's going to show me how that's gone through. It's going to show me the connections that I have in this and who owns that. And then I can share them out. I can export it. I can look at the analytics on how this is run. But if I go into edit it, you can see the steps. So when an item is created and I'm looking at that SharePoint site and that order data list, and if I needed to, I could filter on it or look at a different column view. I'm going to do an approval. So the approval is going to look for, I can change this, but basically send an email out and the first person to respond kicks it off. And I can send the title to it. I can send my details. So basically this is the body of the email, who it's going to. I'm pulling all of this from my SharePoint list. So I can pull those fields right in there. So you can see if I click on that, I get a little pop-up that lets me select all the stuff that came out of that SharePoint list, which is pretty cool. And then if I want to do some expressions, I can build like variables and things like that, concatenate and all that. So I send an email out with a link to the item and I ask for it to be approved. When that approval comes in, if it's approved, I can say yes. And then in which case I will write back to the SharePoint list and say that it's approved, and then I will send an email. If I don't do that, then I am going to update. Well, so this one's going to come up here and I'm going to update it with the approved response. And this one I'm going to reject it if it comes in, and then I will have an email that says, hey, your item has been approved. I can also do something like delete the item, right, if I wanted to. So we have, if I click here, you can see all the actions that we get. So if I just do SharePoint, I will get the SharePoint items that I could do, and I can see that I can add attachments, check files, all that kind of stuff. So that is the quick view of where we're at. And the steps, I will put the slide deck out so you guys can be able to download this, but there's some steps on how we integrate it with Teams platform, because that's the next big thing, is to putting them right inside of Teams and adding them as an app, or using the Power Platform app to build right inside of there. So you can see how it's going to be easy to do that. You can create a little database inside of Teams. That's called Project Oakdale. So you might have heard it as DataFlex Lite, but it has been renamed to Project Oakdale. So we're getting that. So again, I'm going to put this deck out here so you will all have availability to that. And then we can do the same thing with Flow. So Flow's got its own little app that will live inside of Teams, and you can build them right in there, and it easily integration with Teams and be able to send and process information there. And then the last things that I want to get to are additional resources. So tons of stuff for you to learn more about Powerapps, Power Automate. And then I've got a ton of links here on our additional resources, Power Automate, Power YouTube channel. Shane Young is already presenting here, so he's got a YouTube channel with hundreds of, or almost 100 videos, I think. John Levesque is the project manager. He's got a YouTube channel where he's broken out Power Apps in the beginner, or he's a Power Automate, I'm sorry. He's got a bunch of Power Automate videos in YouTube. So if you go to these websites, you can step-by-step on how to do Power Automate. Formulas, like I said, Powerapps uses very Excel-like, and then Daniel Christensen puts out an app like he's also speaking later in the day in the other Powerapps track, but he has tons of videos on that, and then some basics. And then this is the document on connecting to Teams, and this document will let you sign up for our developer program where you can get a free Office 365 license. So you may want to look at that. And again, I'll put this deck out here so you have access to that. Hopefully you enjoyed the session. You were able to get some information out of it that was useful. If you want to follow me on Tech Jahnke and just ping me for any information that you like, or join our meetup group, it's a great way to do that. And then if you want to go to bit.ly.365 Chicago to provide feedback on this session or any other session or the conference in general, we would really appreciate it. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you for the time. And I am out of here so you guys can make it to your next session. Have a great day.